Shankharam Brashanam Jnaneshwarupam Nidyabotarupam Anandam.
Hello, and welcome to Life on the Path of Kriya Yoga. In this podcast, we interview Kriya Yogis from all walks of life to talk about what it means to be a Kriya Yogi as we all, as fellow travelers, try to come to a greater understanding of what Paramhansa Yogananda's teachings mean, how they apply to our lives, and to come to a fuller realization of that. Now with me today is my partner and indispensable co-host, Mayatri Smith-Eisler.
Hi.
Wonderful. So, are you excited about today's guest?
I'm very excited. Now, Hriman is a dear friend, and he's come to Ananda, Texas before, he and his wife, Padma, and we just love having him, and we're so excited that he'll be coming again in just a few weeks, and so we're glad to have you today. We're really enjoying your book, still working through it, but it's a wonderful subject, and I'm looking forward to a deeper dive when you come here, and just some tantalizing tidbits today to help us all get more excited about your visit and what will transpire.
Okay, and since we kind of jumped the gun on the formal introduction, I'll just say our guest today is Nayaswami Hriman McGilloway. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't murdering your last name. And Hriman is a longtime member, teacher, minister on this path, and he is the co-leader of Ananda Seattle with his wife Padma, and he is now a published author with his new book, Once and Future Christ. So welcome, Hriman.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person in Dallas in just a few weeks.
Absolutely, and we will definitely get to the more details about that and towards the end of the podcast, so stay tuned. Tell us more about your background and upbringing and the influence it had on your spiritual development.
Yes, I was raised in a devout Catholic family in Central California, Monterey, California, and my parentage was Irish, and my parents were very devoted to their duties and participation in the local Catholic Church with, of course, an Irish priest, something right out of a Bing Crosby movie, except not in New York City. But it was genuine. We weren't a perfect family by any means, but I sometimes apologize to friends or when I do a class that I had a wonderful childhood. I don't have anything to complain of or any deep scars. I know people do. And the same thing with my Catholic upbringing. I've never considered myself a recovering Catholic. I went through 16 years of Catholic education all the way through University of Santa Clara, a Jesuit college. I even studied for a year and a half in a high school for boys who were considering the priesthood. And that didn't quite work out. That wasn't to be my path, obviously. But it was a very, again, nothing I regretted. I had a wonderful time. Not only was I away from home, and nothing wrong with home, but I just had a great time with all the other boys and, the studies we did and so forth. So,
excuse me for a minute, was that a boarding school?
Yes.
Then?
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
It was, and not too far away in the little seaside town of Santa Cruz, California. And again, it was quite idyllic, but I realized that wasn't going to be my future. So I was pretty steeped in the Catholic faith. I was an altar boy, that kind of thing, In the summers and in preparation for the opening of school each year, I'd be with the nuns getting the classrooms ready or, hanging out with the priests and so on. My two eldest brothers studied for the priesthood before me, as in any good Irish family, and one of them stuck it out and is a priest in nearby Spokane, Washington, a couple of 100 miles to the east of me here in Seattle. So I would say we were pretty dyed in the wool of not just the faith as in dogmas, but the life. It was after all, I was a boy, and I didn't think that much about dogmas, but in the life of a Catholic parish, a Catholic school, a Catholic spiritual family, we had our rosaries and our novenas and our spiritual holidays. So my mother especially was very devout. My father belonged to one of the men's clubs, and as I got older, he would invite me to his men's club to give talks. So I got started pretty early on. So anyway, it was a good upbringing and a very positive one, but I didn't stay. They say in India it may be a blessing indeed to be born into a religion, but it's a misfortune to die in one. And what they mean by die is not the usual word, but to die spiritually, not to expand one's consciousness and awareness. So that really has been my life.
So where did that divergence start to happen then, where you started thinking maybe there's something more, or what sparked that sense of expansion?
What it was wouldn't surprise most people. It was called the 1960s. And being in California and going to university in the San Francisco Bay Area, which later became Silicon Valley, and being at a university that was halfway between Berkeley, across the bay, and Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, let's just say it was a very fertile time. And the Jesuit tradition has a very scholastic and, academic. And so my first class, my first trigger point, Mayatri, was when I took a comparative religious studies course. We studied Buddhism and Hinduism and various things like that. And I had no background in that at all. And I instantly fell in love with meditation. And I don't know if you or our listeners would remember Alan Watts, the very famous Wayne Dyer of his time. He was British, and he was a contemporary in his own way with Swami Kriyananda, who was in the Bay Area at the time, though I did not come across him in those years, though I was right there with all his contemporaries. But Alan Watts was a university speaker. He was on the lecture circuit. So I got to hear him speak in person. I read his books, The Two Hands of God. So this was in the air, between Haight-Ashbury and the Purple Haze and the riots up the street in Berkeley with the Vietnam War. This was the happening scene. And I always kept my distance from, fads and popular things, but I clearly had some meditation samskars. I had a little garage, and I put up a screen. I started to meditate, but there really weren't any books that I knew of at the time. I just had to make it up. And but that was the trigger point. Was, you could call it the 60s revolution. The Beatles,
Yeah, let me ask you this though. So you were still very ensconced in your upbringing, and there was no doubts there. You weren't really searching. You saw meditation as a way to maybe deepen what you already knew. Am I phrasing that? Or how would you put it?
It's interesting. I think if you and I and most people are mature age think back to those years, I can put words on things I did, but at the time I'm not sure I could have. I was intrigued by the idea of meditation. I had had some experiences as an altar boy where I was just totally transported, and such the priest had to, remind me to do my duties. I remember I would periodically, once a week, go to a nearby convent in my town and be the altar boy for the sunrise mass. And the sunrise would come up through the stained glass facing east, right? Okay, you got it, facing east. And I just remember being suffused in this golden light during the mass as one example, and just being transported. So there was, I think what you just said had to do, there was some kind of a deeper knowing of a deeper level of experience. And meditation sort of invited me back into that desire, into wanting to have that.
Beautiful.
So you talk in the introduction of your book, after college and you'd worked for a few years, you went on a kind of a spiritual sojourn with another meditator to Europe, and then you discovered that you could drive all the way to India, which you did.
Yes.
and drove back, and you said that you didn't find what you were looking for in India. So I'm wondering, what was it you were looking for? What did it look like to you at that time?
That's a real good question, because that's the kind of thing I couldn't articulate at that age. At that age, partly it's adventure, right? Partly the exotic, and very strongly in the case of why we went all the way to India was because being meditators, and we had studied Ramana Maharshi's book called Self-Realization, okay? And we did go to his ashram. I since have gone back. And so let me put it this way. Maybe your unspoken question could be rephrased like this. Was I looking for a guru? No. That was something my mind couldn't put into words at that age. But those words weren't part of my vocabulary at that time. It was intuitive, but it was only later that I could really articulate what that was about. So what didn't I find? I guess I didn't find the kind of upliftment and the aha, the transformation that I was looking for. We had tons of adventures, don't get me wrong. It was quite a trip. But
yeah, I'm sure that would be a great book in itself.
Yeah, my Indian friends keep telling me I should write the story. Most people my age who are from India can't believe that anyone could even drive there and what it would be like. So maybe I'll do that for fun. My friend...
That's your next one.
Yeah, next one. My friend lives in Santa Barbara, California, and I would love to get back with him and collaborate. I had a whole bunch of journals that I wrote, and they've been lost in all my moves.
Oh, no.
So, it was really a tragedy when I realized one day, years later, that I couldn't find them. So, but anyway, I didn't find something inarticulate that I wanted.
So you talk about, though, that, you went through the trip, you sold the van in, I believe, in Afghanistan, and then got on a series of flights to get back home. And you talk about having an aha moment somewhere over Tehran. And can you tell us about that aha moment? What was that? What was the realization there, and what did it feel like?
Well, Mark, are you of an age when you can remember when sometimes you could fly in an airplane with empty seats and you could stretch out over the seats? Remember those days?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, somewhere over Tehran, stretched out over the seats, some of the words finally started to come. And they weren't complete, But the aha was I realized on some subconscious level I was resisting committing myself. I couldn't use the word guru, and I couldn't use the word, a spiritual group or anything. But the aha was the realization that I was holding back. And because I didn't find what I was looking for, again, those were not the words yet in my head. But because I didn't, the aha was I was responsible for not having found what I was looking for. But all it was an aha. It was like a door opened, and the kind of words I did use was I was willing to be in relationship with someone or some group. I needed to open myself up and let go of my self-determination, or whatever that word is. I needed to expand somehow.
So the question I have then would be that you felt that way. Did you at all relate it back to your upbringing at all? Were you thinking it had to be beyond that somehow at that point? Or how did that play into it?
And that's a good question, Maitri. By that point, it was like many college or post-college people, I think a lot of my friends, maybe you also, whatever our upbringing was at that point in life, we were not involved. I was not involved with my Catholicism by the time I was in college, okay? So it wasn't really I never looked back. I never rejected anything. I was searching, and I was being drawn in a certain direction. So it wasn't in relationship to my upbringing. There was never any, how does this relate to something before? I guess I wasn't that smart, to be honest with you, or that self-aware, I mean. But that never crossed my mind. I was moving moving forward.
Was the concept of having a guru one that was difficult for you to understand and accept, having grown up in a very devout Christian and indeed Catholic upbringing?
I never challenged it in those terms, but I'll tell a story that came a little bit later. I had met Swami Kriyananda. I had moved to Ananda village, and I was preparing to take Kriya initiation, right? And, so I'd been moving forward and fast and this and that, like some of us. But when I stepped in the Crystal Hermitage Dome up to the altar in Kriya initiation to receive my blessing from Swami Kriyananda, and I looked at those pictures, that was the one and only time my Catholic upbringing raised its head and said, "You're going to hell."
That's
oh my
funny.
Gosh.
Oh my gosh. So what happened
probably wasn't
then?
very funny at the time.
I sort of gulped, because that was the only time that, and it wasn't articulated thought, it was a feeling that I could be doing something spiritually wrong. But it didn't last more than a second, in all my spiritual life on this path, and because I've trained many, many, many people in Kriya as part of my seva, my service here. Oh, I've seen people with anxiety and doubts, and is this my guru? And, I just never had any of that. It's not as if I said, oh, here's my guru either. I just kept moving forward, taking the steps with some kind of innate faith that this was what I should do. I guess I was lucky that way. I didn't have to grapple with it.
Yeah. Did what influence did your Catholic upbringing have on your decision to write this book?
Oh, it had a lot, a great deal. The book doesn't necessarily say a lot about that, but deep down, well, let me tell you this, put it in a story that's in the book. As a young boy, grammar school somewhere, and they teach you, if you know what the catechism is, it's Q&A. It's a little book with Q&A. Why did God make us? God made us to know, love, and serve Him, and so on. And the nuns taught us that the word Catholic means universal, right? And as a young person, I was thrilled. I mean, of course, I learned later what that meant to them. But what I'm trying to say is, in my life journey, the idea of the universality of religion that applied and could help everybody, basic concepts, precepts that were universal, like the laws of nature and science, has been the pole star of my life. And so when Paramhansa Yogananda, wrote books about success and marriage and family and education and health and recipes for vegetarians, when Swami Kriyananda came along and he talked about, a wide range of human interest topics, how to live topics, this has always been very meaningful to me. So, now what was your question? Oh, I just lost it.
I think you've answered it pretty well, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was just asking about the influence of your upbringing on your decision to write this book, and of course what went into the book.
Yes. Okay. So to finish the thought, it was the universality. I had a deep desire, and I was so deeply inspired by Yogananda's teachings from India, which are not exclusive to him. They're very universal. In interpreting the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, I just had to play a part in that message in some way because it's so dear to my heart. I'm very much focused on the desire to, I don't want this to sound overly like a missionary, but how is Christianity ever going to evolve to be a faith that really is, if not for everybody, I would never pretend that, but is a faith that can relate to everybody without sending them to hell? That really is the underlying impulse to take Yogananda's wonderful teachings and interpretations of Jesus and his teachings, and some of the Old Testament too, and show the world that it really is universal when seen through a deeper lens, removing the dogmatism and the sectarianism that we find today.
And of course, this was part of Yogananda's mission, and indeed the mission of the gurus of this path. I mean, starting at least back as far as when Mahavatar Babaji asked Sri Yukteswar to write a book about the universality of religion, and we know the results of that was the holy science. Yeah. I will say, as much as I've been enjoying your book, it's a much easier read than holy science. But do you ever kind of feel like you're right in that line of? I mean, you're certainly contributing to Yogananda's mission to bring these teachings to the West.
Well,
I'm just wondering how that. Do you ever think about the bigger picture in that sense when you're writing your many wonderful articles?
I probably don't think of it in those terms. But here's the thing. I was laughing, Mark, because you referenced the holy science, which, I mean, who can understand it, right? It's so dense. And even Yogananda's original articles on the second coming of Christ, as he called it, and Swami Kriyananda, although he's much more accessible, still, they are such high souls that they would write in a sentence something that you could meditate on for years. And I'm not, I'm more the everyday kind of guy. And so I'm looking back at the book and looking back at how I write and who I am and how I share. There's a need for people like me and you and others to take those high teachings and make them more accessible to people for whom they would never read or even want to read the Holy Science, who might find some of Yogananda's original writings a little bit, especially as they've been edited, a little bit dense and, not that interesting in some respects. So try to make it more the way we talk.
Yeah, and along those lines of with Yogananda's interpretations, is there a favorite of yours that you could share with us today? It can be from your book, of one, something that Jesus said that Yogananda has referenced and interpreted. It would be nice to. What's one of your favorites?
Well, I have three.
Okay, well, go for it.
He was ready for that one.
Who do men say I am? His interpretation of that. But on a very deep and esoteric level is the interpretation of the bread and wine and the consecration at the Last Supper. And now I suddenly forgot the third one, but maybe it'll come to me. So
I'm interested in that bread and wine one.
Oh, and the third one, Mayatri, is he comes down from Mount Tabor from the Transfiguration, and the three disciples with him, according to the text, they don't get into it like, wow, you're the Messiah. They just accepted that. And the only thing they asked him, and this is really revealing if you go deeper into it, the only words they said to him as they were marching down the mountain was, hey, where's Elias? See, the good Jewish boys knew that the prophecy of the Old Testament, the very last words of the Old Testament, was the prophecy of Elias, who was already dead and buried at that point, the prophecy of the coming of Elias. Now, if that isn't reincarnation, come on, okay? Now, there's a lot more to the story, and I won't go into it now. I want to save it for when I'm there. But
exactly.
But that question and they don't say which of the three disciples actually asked it, and then Jesus said, Elias has come already. That's all he said. And then in parentheses, it says, then they knew that he was speaking of John the Baptist. I mean, talk about a spine chiller where the hair goes up. It just like 2 or 3 sentences after this incredible, miraculous. They see Moses, they see Elias, they see Jesus in their astral bodies. I mean, those poor Jewish fishermen guys, it blew their socks off. They were so afraid they fell on the ground with their face down. Is the story. So
you can imagine.
Yeah, and even though they didn't wear socks back then, if they had socks, they'd have been blown off. So those are the 3 kind of stories that Yogananda interprets that I want to talk about at the workshop.
Okay,
that
good.
Are life-changing for a Christian who is searching. Okay?
Perfect.
Because
Wonderful.
it's right there. How many times do you think Jesus was quoted saying, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, hey, wake up and smell the coffee, right?
Yeah.
He was trying to say that behind his words were deeper teachings, and he kept saying it. So we'll talk a lot about those deeper teachings.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Wonderful. So I'm curious, and I have been curious ever since the book came out, is what's the meaning of the title, Once and Future Christ? I understand there's a literary reference there to The Once and Future King, which was a popular book when we were young. And so but I'm not sure what the relationship is there. So if you could go into that just a little bit.
Okay. Well, you gave the goods away, because when we were young, Once and Future King by T.H. White,
Yep.
that was my personal coming of age book. I was a teenager. I don't remember what year. I mean, I was in high school, rather. I don't remember what year. And it was the first kind of an adult book. Now, you might think, most people might think, what's that guy's name? King Arthur was not an adult book. It's a fairy tale. But the way T.H. White wrote the legend, and the way the movie was made with Vanessa Redgrave and what's his name? And
Richard Harris.
Thank you.
You're talking about Camelot, the musical version?
Yes. And the coming of age had to do, with the love affair of Sir Lancelot, the betrayal of the ideals of the Round Table, and when you're that age, idealism is very powerful. And as I was, moving in those years towards adulthood, and of course looking back now in my life of high ideals, that just, the ideals of the Round Table and the struggle that he went through to manifest those, and the betrayal, that's very adult, right? And so maybe maybe most people wouldn't think of it as a coming of age book, but for me, the language, the literary genre, the literary polish of that book was, to me, it was the Iliad or the Odyssey. And I woke up when I read that book. I realized that the adult life was going to be complicated.
Yes.
So,
And right you were.
Yeah, and Once and Future King, so that was the deeper meaning. But in fact, Mark, the title came to me just in a flash. Then I went back and filled in the excuse, the reasons I just gave.
Okay.
But of course, Once and Future is the Christ consciousness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was that was a divine superconscious inspiration that linked my personal journey with the second coming of Christ's teachings of my guru. So
yeah, it made more sense to me as I thought about it, and I thought, well, Jesus was a one-time historical event embodying the Christ consciousness, and the future Christ is within all of us.
That's right.
So it made sense to me. One thing I did want to touch on in the book before we run out of time here was you talk about the either-or attitude towards reality versus the both-and view of reality. And I wonder if you would explain that a bit and go into it.
Okay. Well, many people these days know the very famous parable of the 7 blind men and the elephant, right? Yogananda tells it. Lots of people tell that story in various ways, by which the 7 blind men experience the elephant in very different ways. Each is right and each is wrong. And Swami Kriyananda would talk, as I know Mayatri will remember too, very often he'd talk about, the Western logic from Socrates and Plato, the either or, and the scientific, you do an experiment and either it's true or it's false. And that is deeply embedded in the way we think, okay? And in the Orient, generally speaking, and it would drive Swami Kriyananda crazy because Yogananda would give a speech, a lecture, and he'd say it was this. And then a few sentences later, he would say it was that. And Swami Kriyananda, a young intellectual at age 22 or 23, would say, well, make up your mind. Which is it? And, but you and I, we can be a husband, we can be a parent, we can run a company, or we can be an employee. We play different roles in life. And so, the both and, it's like the light coming into the diamond or the prism and going out in different rainbows. Reality is very much a paradox. And there's a very famous story, I can't remember all their names, very famous story from India of a pundit who is famous for explaining the scriptures. And then there was a great saint, I don't remember which one it was, who had once been very intellectual, but gave it up and became a bhakti, became a devotee. And so the two met each other one day and had kind of a debate, and the scholarly guy gave maybe a dozen explanations of a particular stanza from the Bhagavad Gita or something. And then this saintly person who had thrown away his books sat there and said, well, that's all very nice. And then he started off, and for an hour he gave about 108 different explanations of the meaning of that scripture. And it's really that mindset that wants to see another person's perspective, to see different points of view, which, boy, do we lack in today's political dialogue, don't we? We're so polarized.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
And we really need that ability to, as our American Indians say, don't judge until you've walked a mile in the other man's moccasins, right? And that's what I mean by both and, the willingness to see that there are many facets to reality and to many different points of view, depending on whether you go by feeling, go by reason, or you learn by doing. Does that make sense?
Does you also talk about the fact that most Americans, and I'm not sure how it is worldwide, will consider themselves spiritual but not religious. And does that relate to the either or, both and views of reality, and that people are starting to kind of say, I don't need it to be either or. There's room for both and.
That's a very good insight, Mark. I believe that's true. I had never thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense. Yeah. Because people like that are invariably at least respectful or accepting of all different faiths, even if they don't buy into one particular one, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to, before we end, I'd like to circle back a little bit to, first of all, just tell us a little bit about how we never actually bridged how you got on the path of Kriya, what that looked like. Can you tell us briefly your story of how you came to this specific path? I mean, we've got the sort of the preface,
right.
Now
right.
The story.
Well, the story of that has to do with my wife, Padma, who you both know. And when I got off that airplane, Mark, from over Tehran and landed in San Francisco and came to my parents' home temporarily, feeling at a loss, and I, I, I was, of course, already a meditator. I've indicated that. And I knew, Maitri, that I would be living in the Sierra Mountains of California. There's reasons for that that could be explained rationally, but I knew I was going to be heading to the mountains. But I didn't know anything about Yogananda. I hadn't met Swami Kriyananda. I hadn't read autobiography. But the day I landed was the day of the famous forest fire at Ananda Village near Nevada City. And the forest fire burned Padma's little house down, and she didn't have a house, and she lost everything she had. So she decided she'd have to go out and earn some money to build another house. And she said to herself, and this is her story, she said, well, if I have to leave Ananda Village, I'm going to go someplace beautiful that I would like to be. So she drove to Monterey Bay and rented a little house in Pacific Grove, which was where I was born and raised. And because she had done bookkeeping for Ananda prior to that, she said, well, I'll look for a job with an accounting firm. And my father's business and my brother's business they were CPAs, and I was too. And so I naturally I had no money from India. I was dead broke, had nothing except my backpack. And so I asked my father if I could work at his accounting firm for a while I got back on my feet. He actually wasn't too excited about that. After all, I had disappeared for over a year. So he thought, this guy, I'm not sure I can trust him. But anyway, he said, okay, yeah, come on in. And you know what he gave me to do? He said, my name was Terry then, my birth name. He said, Terry, look, he opened up a file folder. He says, I have to hire a bookkeeper. So why don't you look through these resumes and tell me what you think. So I'm looking through them, and I come across this one, and I'm looking down the resume, and it has a line for hobby, and the woman wrote that her hobby was yoga.
Oh.
So I said, ha, 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 ha. I said, Dad, here's the one. And I said, can I borrow your car keys and your business card? Because I didn't have anything. And I drove, because she didn't even have a telephone yet. She had just moved. And so I drove over to her house. She wasn't there. And I put the business card in her mailbox. And I said, call us on Monday. It was a Friday, I think. And so she called in, and I hired her.
Wow, what a romance story on so many levels.
So she handed me Autobiography of a Yogi. She told me her story about Ananda Village. And, I wasn't going to stay in Monterey. I knew I had a journey to go on. And here's a funny story. It's sort of silly, but I actually knew. Not only did I know I would be in the Sierra Nevadas, but I had this image that I would be apprenticed to or working for someone either famous or wealthy. I didn't use the guru word, but I saw my next stage of life as being aligned with being helpful to somebody who had a life's work. So,
wow.
Wonderful story. I'm constantly amazed at how many, it seems like there's several folks who are now have stayed with Ananda all these years, who are in senior leadership, who came like the day of the forest fire, the day after the forest fire, sometime like right in that time frame. And it's an amazing story to me because it suggests to me that what you think is a disaster may not be a disaster.
Right.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I want to know, this is for my own personal, so when did you actually fall in love with Padma, though? When did that happen? After you got to Ananda or
Is this
before?
being recorded?
Well, we can take this part out if you want.
We'll take this part out.
She likes to say to friends that I never proposed to her because because the partnership was so obvious from the beginning that, like the rest of my spiritual life, there was never any question.
Beautiful. That's sweet.
So,
Well, that's a wonderful story. Um, there's two questions I want to ask.
okay,
Okay,
I'll make it
one
short.
is what is one of the most surprising things to happen to you since you've been on the path of Kriya?
What was that adjective? What was one of the what?
The most surprising things.
Ah, surprising. Wow. Well, I won't frame it in terms of an incident. I think the most surprising thing spiritually is just how much I've evolved from, I don't know, a jnana yogi to a bhakti yogi. That I did not anticipate. Not that I anticipated anything, as you can tell from my story generally, but then as to incidents, okay, I'll tell you one. 2009, I went to Italy to take the very first Nayaswami vows. And as when I knelt before Swami Kriyananda and he reached out to bless me, I heard him say, "And you are now a Kriyacharya."
Wow.
There was no, no preamble, no expectation at all in my aura. I mean, fine, of course, it's wonderful, but
Wow.
yeah.
Well, on that bhakti yogi, was that just sort of a gradual thing, and what did you feel really helped bring you to that transformation?
What helped me in that transformation was what I perceived. I don't think the perception is all that true, but what I perceived to be the same transformation in Swami Kriyananda. In his case, as you know, in his latter years, he freely expressed his devotion. It was always there, don't get me wrong, but that really made an impression on me. That sort of gave me permission to go there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, our time is running short here, Hriman, and so I'm going to just say, as we start our wrap up, again, the name of the book, if you didn't get that from the conversation, is Once and Future Christ, and it came out, what, about 6 months ago?
Yes, a year ago.
Okay. And it's a wonderful book. There are so many wonderful topics in here. One of the clearest explanations I've ever heard of the Trinity in the East of Om Tat Sat and how that relates to the Trinity in Christianity, things like that. And then I particularly like part 2 because there's a whole array of different topics that come up often, and for instance, I'll just read some of the titles. The soul's need for a guru. How does God view suffering? Did Jesus die for our sins? Overcoming karma, parentheses sin, and my personal favorite, oh hell, let's just talk about it. And and there's many of those wonderful short chapters that just take on one of those fundamental questions and things that people often ask. So if you want to learn more about all that, then come to the workshop. Hriman will be here the weekend of September 27, 28. Is it the 27th is the actual workshop, Maitri? Is that the...
I think the 28th is the workshop. The 27th is the introduction. That's Friday.
Is the introduction. Okay. Yeah. All this information is on our website at anandadallas.org or anandatexas.org. unconditional.org, and you'll see the information is right there on the homepage. You can click on one of the links, find how you can avail yourself of one of these opportunities to hear Hriman speak. And then, of course, he'll be with us on that Sunday, too, to do Sunday service for all of us. And we're certainly looking forward to your visit, Hriman.
I am too.
So, Maitri, I believe you had a question.
And so, in wrapping up, we ask all of our interviewees. Is that what? Yeah. Anyway, we ask all our guests this particular question, and it is: how would you define the path of Kriya Yoga in 5 words?
The airplane route to God.
Was that 5? The airplane route to... Wow! Isn't that amazing? Haven't gotten that answer yet. Perfect.
Okay.
And I'd just like to say thank you to our guest today, Hriman, and how much we're looking forward to your visit. Maitri, did you have anything any closing words that you wanted to say?
It's just been a joy as always, and it'll be a very joyful visit, I'm sure. You know, we Texans, we love to treat you well.
Yes, you do.
So we look forward to seeing you. And give our love to Padma.
Yes, indeed. I look forward to seeing you and everyone.
Once again, the information about all of the goings-on around Hriman's visit will be on our website at anandadalas.org. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.